This next lesson is our last lesson that we're going to do on this unit of reasoning and logic, and it is going to introduce theorems. So the lesson itself is on proving angles congruent. So we're going to see how this applies to your first theorem that you're going to learn. So what is a theorem? A theorem is a conjecture or a statement that you must prove to be true. So remember, a conjecture is a statement that is made based on a pattern or an observation. So a theorem is a conjecture or statement that you make that you have to prove to be true. Unlike a postulate, which we learned about in Unit 1, a postulate is a statement that you can make that is a rule or an axiom, and we accept it to be true. We don't have to prove the postulates, but we do have to prove theorems. So to do that, we can use information that's given to us in the problem. We can use given information. We can use definitions that we've learned. We can use properties. That we've learned. We can use postulates, which once again are rules or axioms that we don't have to prove. We can accept them to be true. And we can also use previously proven theorems to prove other theorems. If we have previously proven them, we can use them in a proof for something else. So the first theorem that you're going to have is the vertical angles theorem. Vertical angles are congruent is the first theorem that we have. So when we're writing a proof, we're going to separate the theorem you want to prove into a hypothesis and a conclusion. The hypothesis becomes the given statement for the theorem, and the conclusion becomes what you want to prove. So let's look at a couple of examples just using the vertical angles theorem in problem 1 and 2. In problem 1, we're going to use the vertical angle theorem to find the value of x. So in the diagram, we have two straight lines that cross each other. So that means we have two angles whose sides are formed by opposite rays, which is the definition of a vertical angle. So we know that we have vertical angles by the definition of a vertical angle. And according to the vertical angles theorem, it says that vertical angles are congruent. So we can take these two angles that are vertical angles, and we can set their measurements equal to each other. So 2x plus 42 equals 3x minus 10. Solve this for x. We can subtract 2x from both sides. Gives us x minus 10 equals 42. And then you can add 10 to both sides, and you have x is equal to 52. So your answer to the value of x is equal to 52. In problem 2, they want you to write a proof using the vertical angles theorem. So let's do a 2-column proof. So we're going to have statements on the left and the reasons for each statement on the right of our 2-column proof. So our first statement and first reason, we'll start with the given information. So the given information, let's see, they tell us that angle 2 is congruent to angle 3. And our reason for that, we can just state that's given information in the problem. So the second statement that we can make by looking at the diagram, we can observe that we have vertical angles. Angles 1 and angle 3 are vertical angles because they're two angles formed by two straight lines, or their opposites. Their sides are made up of opposite rays. So we can make the statement that angle 1 is congruent to angle 3 because of the vertical angles theorem. So now the last statement that we want to prove that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. So we can do that now in this statement. Because we have angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, angle 2 is congruent to angle 3, and angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. So since both those angles are equal to the same angle, then they have to be equal to each other. So we can make the statement that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2 because of the transitive property of congruence. Transitive property of congruence. The next definition is a paragraph proof. So a paragraph proof is just another kind of proof. The first proof that you've used is a two-column proof. This is a different kind of proof called a paragraph proof, and it's written as sentences in a paragraph. And we're going to look at an example of that in a minute. First, let's look at these four theorems below. The first one is the congruent supplements theorem. It states that if two angles are supplements of the same angle or of congruent angles, then those two angles are congruent. So if you remember, supplements are two angles that add to be 180. So if two angles are supplements of the same angle, then those two angles are congruent. There's a congruent complements theorem that's similar. Remember, complements are two angles that add to be 90. And if two angles are complements of the same angle or of congruent angles, then those two angles are congruent. And our next problem, in problem 3, we're going to be writing a paragraph proof, and we're actually going to be writing a proof of the congruent complements theorem. So we'll have an example of that in a second. Let's scroll down first and finish out the last two theorems on this page. The last two theorems on the left say that one of them is the right angle congruence theorem. It simply states that all right angles are congruent. So we will be able to use that in proofs. And theorem, the next theorem that has no name, it says theorem 2-5. It says if two angles are congruent and supplementary, then each angle is a right angle. So if we need to use this theorem in any other proofs, since it does not have a name for the theorem, we would have to write all the words and say if two angles are congruent and they're supplementary, then each is a right angle. So let's look at problem 3 and how to write a paragraph proof. In problem 3, we're going to be writing a paragraph proof, which is actually a proof of the congruent complements theorem. We're given that angle 1 and angle 2 are complementary. So here we have angle 1 and angle 2. They're complementary, which means their measures add to be 90. And measure of angle 2 and angle 3, they're also going to be 90 because we're also given that that's complementary. So we have to prove that angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, given this information. So to write a paragraph proof, you do write it in sentence form. So write your given information first. So we're just going to say, it is given that angle 1 and angle 2 are complementary, and angle 2 and angle 3 are complementary. So that means the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 is equal to 90. And the measure of angle 2 plus the measure of angle 3 is equal to 90 by the definition of complementary angles. So now by the transitive property of equality, we can state that the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 is equal to measure of angle 2 plus the measure of angle 3. Since they were both equal to 90, that means that they're both equal to each other. That's what the transitive property says. So now by the subtraction property, of equality, we can subtract the measure of angle 2 from each side to get the measure of angle 1 equals measure of angle 3. So by definition of congruence, we can say angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. Definition of congruence. Because if you remember, congruence just states that two angles are congruent if their measures are equal. So now we have proven the statement that they've asked us to prove. The measure of angle 1 is congruent to the measure of angle 3. The last two problems, problem 4 and problem 5, are just using the congruent supplements theorem and the congruent complements theorem. Problem number 4 says if angle A and angle B are supplements, that means that they add to be 180, and angle A and angle C are supplements, and angle A and angle C are supplements, what can you conclude about angle B and angle C? And it asks you to explain. Anytime it asks you to explain, it just means you need to give a reason, a justification for a statement that you make. So let's look at the congruent supplements theorem. It says if two angles are supplements of the same angle or of congruent angles, then the two angles are congruent. So here, A and B are supplements, and A and C are supplements. So since B and C are supplements of the same angle, which is A, then that means that angle B and angle C have to be congruent to each other. Angle B is congruent to angle C. And the explanation is that it's by the congruent supplements theorem. And similarly, problem 5 is using the congruent complements theorem. It says your friend knows that angle 1 and angle 2 are complementary, and that angle 1 and angle 3 are complementary, and he concludes that angle 2 and angle 3 must be complementary. What's the error in his reasoning? We have 1 and 2 that are complementary, and 1 and 3. So we have two angles. We have angle 2 and angle 3 that are both complementary to the same angle, angle 1. So what he should have said by the congruent complements theorem is not that they are complementary, but he should have said what? He should have said angle 2 is congruent to angle 3 by the congruent complements theorem.